right? So culture can be adaptive, but culture can also be maladaptive. And so, as we look at things like overconsumption and pollution, right, these fulfilled a role evolutionarily, historically, right? We talked about in our discussion of chiefdoms, we talked about entertaining in a chiefly manner, right? Entertaining in a chiefly manner is absolutely 100% conspicuous consumption. It was a sign of um, basically having disposable income. It was a sign of being wealthy enough that you could be wasteful and having that associated with some degree of status. And so, absolutely, in this kind of competition and ramping up of political complexity, um, being able to have disposable wealth absolutely was associated with increases in social status, right? And then having more wives and having more allies and having more power. Is that still adaptive in a modern context? No, right? Because this conspicuous consumption has led to economic collapse. It's led to um, increasing pollution that's ultimately going to be a problem for us and our longevity as a species, right? And potentially can even threaten our continued survival and reproduction. If we talk about eating in a chiefly manner, for example, right? Entertaining in a chiefly manner, always eating in excess, then we start to see health concerns like obesity, heart disease, diabetes, etc. Right? So things that may have served an adaptive function evolutionarily or historically may no longer serve that same adaptive function. All right, so what is our evolutionary basis for culture? Okay, I am one of the first to say that great apes show that we have kind of a latent or rudimentary capacity for culture, that the building blocks of culture are present in great ape societies. Okay, that being said, there is still a substantial gap between what primates do and what fully human cultures are able to express, right? What are some of the similarities? Well, non human primates, and specifically, and we'll talk about chimps and bonobos here, they are able to learn from experience and change their behavior as a result. So they can be taught to do things because of the outcome of those things. They use tools. There was a headline a couple of years ago that said chimps have finally entered the Stone Age, right? What does that mean? Well, it means that their level of stone tool use for food acquisition was finally developed enough um, that they are officially practicing lithic technology, right? So, um, does this mean they weren't using stones before then? No, it doesn't. But it just is this kind of an evolutionary leap where we're starting to see that mental template. We're starting to see that imagination of what a source, what a raw material could become. And then chimpanzees also hunt both solitarily and cooperatively. And in cases where they hunt cooperatively, they have rules about how food is shared after the hunt. And this is something that is an incredible human behavior. This idea of cooperative hunting and rules about food sharing. So many of these rudimentary building blocks are present. I mean, cognitively, chimps are pretty advanced. They can recognize theory of mind. They can determine cause and effect. They recognize that different individuals have different states of mind, and that what another individual believes or sees or thinks is not going to always match up to what they believe or see or think. So what does this mean in terms of how we're different? Well, cooperation is and sharing is definitely much more developed among humans. And so, specifically, chimps will share food when they've engaged in cooperative hunts, but those cooperative hunts only make up 3 to 10% of their diet. It's not going to make up the bulk of their diet. Humans, by contrast, a full 40 to 60% of their diet is based on cooperatively hunted meat. And so food sharing is going to extend a lot farther. You're going to share most foods that humans eat, right? We tend to have a human tendency to share food. We're much more willing to share food than we are to share money, for example. Even though in modern times we could argue that money is definitely more quote unquote valuable, right? We've got this trait of humans maximizing reproductive success by mating throughout the year. This is not solely a human characteristic, but this has enormous ramifications for pair bonding and kind of the structure of families in humans. So, the fact that we're not seasonal breeders, the fact that we have a long pregnancy and a long period of lactation, these absolutely affect a lot of our behaviors. And food sharing actually is a way to kind of offset the economic demands of extended period of gestation and lactation. You know, the fact that we're pregnant for so long and then the fact that we nurse our infants for so long, food sharing helps to kind of offset those costs. But so too does long term pair bonding. And so we don't see human males and females just come together during the breeding season, for example, but we see long term pair bonds and extended periods of time where human males and females live in close proximity. They work together, they share widely, both just within the family as well as outside of the family, right? It really is the basis of human social organization. And then humans have exogamy and kinship systems. And perhaps importantly is the fact that human societies often even designate what we call fictive kin, people who are elevated to kinship status without actually being blood relatives. So, most discussions of chimpanzee culture focus on things like cooperative hunting and tool use. Um, I would argue that these are not necessarily culture because they're not symbolic or arbitrary. Chimpanzees are not using tools to hunt, okay? In their cooperative hunts, they do play certain roles. They'll be the scout, they'll be the individual who kind of flushes out the prey, they'll be the individual who delivers the killing blow, etc. And then they have rules of food sharing based on what role you played and whether you're an ally of the males that were engaging in the hunt, etc. But there's still, I mean, this hunting is used instrumentally, right? It's being used simply to acquire resources. It's not hunting for fun, so to speak. I you could argue that human hunting isn't either, but kind of the ways that humans rely on technology for their hunt kind of changes that playing field a little bit. When we talk about tool use for chimpanzees, we're not generally talking about a mental template and having to imagine what a rock could become in terms of manufacturing tools. Rather, you've got a nut that's tough to crack, and therefore you pick up a rock and use a rock to help crack it, right? There are some chimpanzee behaviors, though, that do qualify as culture. And so here we've got some pictures from some greeting displays. Chimpanzees have regionally specific greeting displays. So that if you're a chimp from Gombe versus a chimp from the Thai forest, you are going to greet your peers in a way that is culturally specific to kind of where you grew up. And so captive chimpanzees engage in a wrist present and a wrist sniff. That's kind of what's being done over here in this first picture, where one of the chimps will present the wrist to the other. They will sniff it, they might mouth it, and then they might trade roles. But in the wild, chimpanzees will do these interesting kind of grasping, basically kind of like bro handshakes, where they may join hands and chest bump, or they may clasp each other's wrists and then start grooming each other in particular ways, etc. And this is something that is completely arbitrary. All that it identifies is basically where you came from. Okay, so the way that you as an individual chimpanzee greets your peers, it identifies where you as an individual chimpanzee grew up. Okay. Functionally, they're all serving the same function. It's a greeting display, it's recognizing in-group versus out-group. So this hand grasp here versus this where you wrap your wrists is not inherently better, right? It is just that they're arbitrary and kind of uh, um, culturally specific. And this may even extend then into chimpanzee fashion. And so here we're looking at there's been a new behavioral trend among chimps in the wild to um, start to adorn their ears with flowers and grasses and such. And so the reason that I have this pictured here, here's a wild chimp doing this as kind of a fashion trend. We've had a special chimp at our zoo for a while, Thunder, who has done this naturally. So Thunder was a trendsetter. Thunder was an influencer, right? That's my idea of a joke there. Okay. So this brings us then to aspects of kind of the pervasiveness of certain cultural features. We're going to talk specifically here about um, universality, generality, and particularity. Cultural universals are features that are found in every culture. Okay. Um, Cultural generalities are features that are common to several but not all human groups. And then cultural particularities are features that are unique to certain cultural traditions. We have a series of both biologically based universalities and social universalities. So, from our biology, we have long infant dependency. We also have year round sexuality. We have a complex brain that takes years to grow, hence that long period of infant dependency. That complex brain enables us to use symbols, language, and tools, hence our evolved basis for the capacity for culture. But that doesn't mean then that all cultures are the same, let's say. We have some social universalities too. We live in groups. We also always define individuals as kin or family versus not kin or not family. Some of the cultural generalities. Um, that we see, one of those is a nuclear family. So we always see life organized into kin groups or family groups, but we don't always see that as a nuclear family. We usually see it as a nuclear family, but that kinship may take certain different forms. These generalities exist through common cultural origins, through colonization, and through cultural borrowing. Particularities are becoming increasingly rare because of cultural diffusion or borrowing. We are generally kind of moving towards a global culture. Borrowed cultural traits will be modified to fit the culture that adopts them, so that may be integrated into their own kind of storytelling or own kind of like justification for it. Cultures, though, vary in their beliefs, practices, integration, and patterning. So, um, I'm trying to think of a good example of this. The Australian Aborigines were obsessed with the movie Rambo. Rambo was like an 80s movie with, oh, I can't even place actors. I mean, it was, I don't know if it was Sylvester Stallone or whatever, but you've got this idea of someone coming in and rescuing his compatriots, right? Well, they saw Rambo as kind of like the deliverer or the Messiah, and they saw him coming in and kind of pushing away um, colonial ideas and norms, and essentially liberating the Australian Aborigines to practice their own um historical cultural traditions.